I want you to picture this. I'm 61 years old, wearing my best navy dress, sitting at a wedding reception in a beautiful banquet hall in Charlotte, North Carolina. My best friend of 30 years just said, "I do." The champagne is cold. The music is sweet. And my husband of 24 years, the man I ironed shirts for, prayed over, stood by through 2 layoffs and a cancer scare, is across the room with his hand on my best friend's waist, slowly, like he had every right in the world. And her brand new husband's elderly parents saw every single second of it. Honey, stay with me, because what happened next changed all 3 of our lives forever. Please like this video and tell me where you watch it from. Maybe that way I can find some stories from your neighbors' lives. My name is Diane Celestine Broward, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. I am not a jealous woman, never have been. 31 years of friendship with Beverly Tate will tell you that. I cheered when she got the promotion I also applied for back in 1998. I threw her baby shower even after my own miscarriage 3 weeks prior that I hadn't told anyone about yet. I sat in the front pew at her first wedding in 2001 and smiled until my face ached, even though I thought her first husband, Daryl, was about as trustworthy as a screen door on a submarine. So, when Beverly called me in January to say she was getting married again at 63 years old to a retired pharmacist named Eugene Whitfield, who she'd met at a church conference in Raleigh, I screamed into the phone like I was 25. I meant every bit of it. Beverly deserved this. After Daryl's cheating, after the divorce, after raising her son Marcus alone for 15 years, after the loneliness she never fully admitted to, but that I could see in her eyes every time we had dinner, she deserved a good man. And by every account, Eugene was exactly that: quiet, steady, church-going, kind. His parents, Harold and Estelle Whitfield, both in their late 80s, were still together after 62 years of marriage. Can you imagine? 62 years. I told my husband Robert about that, and he said, "Good for them," in a tone that didn't invite further conversation. I should have paid more attention to that tone. Robert Broward, my husband. 59 years old, 6 feet even, a man who had aged well in the way that sometimes feels unfair. Distinguished temples, easy smile, the kind of looks that got better with time. We had 24 years together, a house in Decatur, 2 grown kids, a life built on what I genuinely believed was a solid foundation. The cracks had been there. I know that now. The late nights that became more frequent. The phone that went everywhere with him, even the bathroom. The way he sometimes looked at Beverly when we all had dinner together. Quick glances I had dismissed as nothing because dismissing things was easier than confronting them. The wedding was on a Saturday in April. Venue was a beautiful restored plantation house outside Charlotte. Beverly had gone all out. Cream and gold, live jazz quartet, the whole thing. She looked stunning. Ivory dress, natural hair pinned up with pearls, the kind of joy on her face that I'd been waiting to see for 15 years. I hugged her so hard before the ceremony she told me I was going to wrinkle her dress. The ceremony was beautiful. Eugene cried when he saw her come down the aisle. Real tears, no performance. His parents sat in the front row. Harold in a suit that probably dated to the Reagan administration but was pressed to perfection. Estelle in lavender with her white gloves and her pearls. They held hands the whole ceremony. I kept glancing at them and thinking, that's what endurance looks like. That's what I want. Dinner was wonderful. Speeches were made. The jazz quartet played something slow and golden, and the dance floor filled up. I went to the ladies' room around 9 o'clock. I was gone maybe 6 minutes. When I came back, I stopped in the doorway between the corridor and the reception hall. At first, my brain didn't process what my eyes were seeing. It offered me alternatives, explanations, rewrites, innocent interpretations, because surely what I was seeing wasn't what it looked like. Robert was on the edge of the dance floor, half turned away from the room, standing close to Beverly. Too close. His hand was at her waist. Not a friendly wedding dance close. Something slower. Something deliberate. Beverly's expression was unreadable from where I stood. Her face slightly turned, neither leaning in nor pulling away. Frozen in that particular way a person freezes when something is happening that they don't know how to stop. And directly to their left, not 8 feet away, sitting at the family table with their champagne glasses and their 62 years of marriage, Harold and Estelle Whitfield were watching. Estelle's white-gloved hand had stopped halfway to her glass. Harold's jaw was set like stone. I stood in that doorway for what felt like a full minute, but was probably 4 seconds. Then I walked across that room. I want to tell you I said something powerful, something sharp and dignified, the kind of line that gets remembered. I want to tell you I handled it with grace. What I actually said was his name, just his name, in a voice I didn't fully recognize as my own, too quiet, too controlled, the way a pressure cooker sounds right before the lid gives. Robert. He turned. And the thing that did the most damage in that moment, more than the hand on the waist, more than the closeness, more than any of it, was the half-second delay before his expression shifted. That fraction of a moment when his face still held whatever it had been holding before he saw me, and I got to see it before the mask came back on. Beverly stepped back immediately. Diane. Don't, I said, still quiet. Still controlled. Not right now. I looked at Robert. He had the expression of a man who was deciding in real time which version of the story to lead with. I had seen that expression before. I just hadn't known what I was seeing. It wasn't, he started. I said not right now. I picked up my purse from our table. I walked to the bar, ordered a club soda, and spent the next 45 minutes being the best wedding guest in the history of Charlotte, North Carolina. I danced with Beverly's son, Marcus. I talked to the jazz quartet's trumpet player about his career. I sat with Harold and Estelle Whitfield for 20 minutes and listened to stories about their early years in Greensboro, and Estelle held my hand at one point in a way that told me she understood more about what was happening than I'd said out loud. Baby, she said, this tiny woman in her lavender dress and white gloves, a man who acts like a fool in public has been acting like a fool in private for a long time. I looked at her. You didn't deserve to see that, she said, and neither did we, but you seeing it, that might be the most important thing that happened to you this year. I drove home alone that night. Robert had driven separately. He'd told me earlier he might need to leave before me, for reasons I now understood differently. He came home around midnight. I was in the kitchen, still in my navy dress, drinking tea that had gone cold. He sat across from me, and for a long time neither of us said anything. Then he said it wasn't what it looked like. I wrapped my hands around my mug. Robert, I need you to think very carefully about what you say next, because whatever you say, I'm going to remember it for the rest of my life, and I'd rather you tell me something true that hurts than something false that insults my intelligence. He looked at the table. Long pause. It's been going on for 8 months, he said. The kitchen was very quiet. 8 months, I repeated. Yes. I nodded slowly. Not because I was okay, but because part of me, some small, exhausted, long-suffering part of me, had known had known and had chosen over and over the comfort of not knowing. And now, the choice had been made for me, publicly, at my best friend's wedding, in front of an elderly couple who had managed to stay faithful to each other for 62 years. Okay, I said. Diane, I need you to sleep somewhere else tonight, I said, and tomorrow I need you to be gone before I wake up. He started to say something else, and I held up one hand. There was nothing else to say. The next morning I called Beverly before he was even out of the driveway. Now, I need you to stay with me here because this is where the story gets complicated, because Beverly is not a villain in this story. I know that might be hard to hear. I thought about making her one. Oh, Lord knows it would have been easier, but the truth is more human than that, and I promised myself when I started telling this story that I would tell it true. Beverly picked up on the second ring. She'd been awake, clearly. Her voice was tight with the particular tension of someone who has been rehearsing an apology for hours and still doesn't have it right. Diane, I'm so sorry. I need you to know. I know, I said. You know what? I know it wasn't just last night, I said. I know it's been going on. He told me. Silence. I ended it, Beverly said, 2 weeks ago. I ended it before the wedding. I swear to you, Diane, I couldn't walk into my own marriage carrying that. Her voice broke. He showed up last night and he was saying things and I didn't know how to. Beverly. I stopped her. I believe you about ending it. I paused. I'm also not ready to talk to you yet. I need some time, but I needed you to know I'm not writing you off. Not yet, maybe not ever, but I need some time. She was crying. Full, ugly, genuine crying. I'm so sorry, she kept saying. Diane, I'm so sorry. I know, I said again, and I meant it. I hung up and sat down on the bottom stair of my house and thought about 31 years of friendship. Every hard moment I'd been there for, every time she'd been there for me. The miscarriage I'd finally told her about 2 years after the fact, crying into her shoulder on her couch. The nights I'd slept in her guest room when Robert and I were in bad patches that I'd also minimized and rationalized and refused to examine too closely. We had both been dishonest with each other in different ways. That was the truth I had to sit with. The harder truth was about me, because here's what nobody tells you about betrayal when you're 61 years old. It doesn't just hurt you in the present tense. It reaches back. It rewrites. Every memory gets reopened and re-examined under a cold new light. The anniversary trip to Savannah 3 years ago, was he already distant then? Or am I reinterpreting? The way he'd seemed almost relieved when I took that girl's trip to New Orleans, was that just my imagination? When did I start choosing comfort over clarity? I had built a very nice life around not asking certain questions. I am not a jealous woman. That part was true. But I had also confused being unbothered with being wise. Sometimes unbothered just means afraid. I called my daughter Keisha that afternoon. She was 31, lived in Baltimore, sharp as a tack and gentler than she let on. When I told her what happened, she went so quiet I thought the call dropped. Mama, she said finally, how long have you known something was wrong? I looked out the window at the dogwood tree Robert had planted in the front yard for our 10th anniversary. Beautiful tree, still blooming. A while, I admitted. Okay, she said, and then, come stay with me. Come up here for a week. Let me take care of you for once. I said I'd think about it. But I was already looking up train tickets before we hung up. Baltimore in April is a different thing from Atlanta. Colder, grayer, with that particular East Coast energy that makes you walk faster just from proximity to it. Keisha met me at Penn Station in a yellow rain jacket, looking so much like my mother in her 30s that it stopped my breath for a second. She hugged me on the platform for a long time without saying anything. That's my daughter. She knows when words help and when they don't. Her apartment was small, warm, full of books and plants, and the kind of lived in comfort that tells you a person is genuinely at home in their own life. She made me jerk chicken and rice the first night, my recipe, the one I'd taught her, and we sat at her little kitchen table and I told her everything from the beginning. Not the sanitized version, the real one, including the parts where I knew and looked away. Keisha listened without interrupting. She got that from me, ironically. I had taught her that listening was a form of love. It was strange and painful and beautiful to have it turned back on me. When I finished, she said, "So what do you want, Mama?" Not what's right, not what makes sense. What do you want? I thought about it seriously. "I want to not feel like a fool," I said. "That's not a want," she said. "That's a wound. What do you want?" I was quiet for a long time. "I want to feel like 61 isn't the end of something," I finally said. "I want it to be the beginning of something, I don't know what, just something that belongs to me." Keisha nodded slowly. "Then that's what we build," she said. I slept 10 hours that night. Dreamlessly, deeply, the way you sleep when you finally put down something heavy. In the morning, I made an appointment with a divorce attorney in Atlanta over the phone. Her name was Patricia Odom, and when I explained the situation, she said in a completely matter-of-fact tone, "Honey, Georgia is an equitable distribution state and you have 24 years of marriage. You're going to be fine." Those 6 words, "you're going to be fine," made me cry in Keisha's bathroom with the shower running so she wouldn't hear. I called Beverly on day 3, not to reconcile, not yet, but because I kept thinking about what Estelle Whitfield had said at the reception. You seeing it might be the most important thing that happened to you this year. And because I realized that as much as Beverly had hurt me, she had also, in some crooked way, done me a favor. She answered immediately. "I've been waiting," she said, voice raw, no pretense. "I know," I said. "I'm not ready to be your friend again yet. I want to be honest about that, but I'm also not ready to lose 31 years. I paused. "I need you to tell me everything, not to punish you, because I need the full truth to decide what I actually want to do." She told me everything. It had started at a birthday dinner. Mine, ironically. The 3 of us had gone out to celebrate my 61st in August. Robert had driven Beverly home because she'd had too much to drink. That was the night. 8 months before their wedding, 6 months before I found out. "Why?" I asked, not angry, genuinely asking. "Beverly, after everything, why him?" Long silence. "Loneliness," she said quietly, "and he made me feel seen. And I know how terrible that sounds given who he belongs to. I know. I want you to understand it wasn't about you. It was never about hurting you." "But it did," I said. "Yes," she said, "it did. And I will spend a long time making peace with that." I sat with that for a moment. "How's Eugene?" I asked. Another silence. Longer this time. "He knows," she said. "I told him, before the wedding, the full truth." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "He married me anyway." I thought about Eugene crying when he saw her come down the aisle. I thought about his parents holding hands through the whole ceremony. I thought about 62 years. "That's a man," I said. "Yes," she said, "he is." There is a specific kind of grief that comes with ending a long marriage that nobody prepares you for. It's not like losing someone to death. There's no community around it, no casseroles appearing at your door, no socially sanctioned period of mourning. You're expected to be either devastated or liberated, and the truth is usually neither. The truth is usually a long, quiet, confusing middle ground where you wake up at 3 in the morning and reach for someone who isn't there and feel simultaneously relief and devastation that they aren't. Robert moved out in May. He didn't fight it. That told me something too. Either the guilt was too heavy, or there was somewhere else he'd rather be, or both. He took his clothes, his golf clubs, the leather armchair he'd had since before we met. He left the dogwood tree. I stood on the porch and watched him load the last box into his car, and when he turned around, he looked older than I'd ever seen him look. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know," I said. "I don't expect Robert." I said his name the same way I had at the wedding. Quiet. Final. "It's done." He nodded, got in the car, drove away. I went inside, made coffee, and called my mother, Cora Broward, 79 years old, still living in the house in Memphis where I grew up, still sharp, still formidable, listened to the whole story without interruption. Then she said, "I never liked him." I laughed so hard I spilled my coffee. Real laughter, the kind that surprises you. "Mama, you never said that." "You never asked," she said simply. I flew to Memphis that weekend. Spent 4 days in my childhood home, sleeping in my old room, eating my mother's cooking, letting her rearrange my hair the way she used to when I was a girl. There is something about being in the house where you were formed. Something that reminds you that you existed before all of it. Before Robert, before the marriage, before the life you built that turned out to be built on sand in places you hadn't checked. I existed before all of it. That sounds simple. It isn't. My mother said something to me on the last evening, sitting on her back porch, watching the Memphis sunset go orange over the rooftops. She said, "The thing about women like you and me, Diane, is we are so busy being strong for everybody else that we forget to be soft for ourselves. And then we wonder why we're tired all the time." I looked at her. "You have been carrying Robert for 24 years, she said. "You knew who he was. Maybe not the specifics, but you knew the shape of him. And you stayed because you were afraid that leaving meant failing." "Didn't it?" I asked. "No," she said firmly. "Leaving a bad situation isn't failing. Staying in one until it humiliates you in public, that's the thing to examine." She wasn't being cruel. That's the thing about my mother. She delivers truth like a nurse delivers medicine. Not gently, not harshly, just accurately. I flew home to Atlanta with something I hadn't carried in a long time. Clarity. 6 months after the wedding, I did 3 things I had never done in my adult life. First, I enrolled in a watercolor class at the Community Arts Center in Decatur. I had always wanted to paint, had always said, "Someday when I have time." I had time now. I was terrible at it, and I loved every second. Second, I booked a solo trip to New Orleans for 10 days. Not with girlfriends, not with family, alone. Just me, the French Quarter. Good food, good music, and the specific freedom of being accountable to no one's schedule but my own. Third, I had dinner with Estelle Whitfield. That one wasn't planned. Beverly had mentioned gently that Estelle had asked about me, that the old woman had apparently thought about our conversation at the reception and wanted to check on me. Beverly passed along her number without pressure, and I sat on it for 3 weeks before I called. We met at a restaurant in Charlotte, halfway between both of us. Estelle was exactly as I remembered, small, upright, white gloves replaced with a simpler pair, eyes that saw everything and judged selectively. We talked for 3 hours. She told me about her own first years of marriage, the hard ones, the years when Harold had been distant and difficult, and she had wondered more than once if she'd made a mistake. She told me about the choice she made at 34 years old to have a direct, unvarnished conversation with him about exactly what she needed and exactly what she would not accept. I didn't threaten him, she said. I informed him. There's a difference. A threat is about fear. What I did was about dignity. I wrote that down on a napkin. A threat is about fear. What I did was about dignity. You're going to be all right, she told me before we parted in the parking lot. You know why I know that? Why? Because when it happened, you walked across that room, she said. You didn't collapse. You didn't make a scene. You walked across that room and you handled yourself. That's not nothing, baby. That's character. I hugged her. She smelled like Chanel No. 5 and Johnson's baby powder, the exact same combination my grandmother used to wear. I cried in the car, but they were different tears than the ones from before. Not grief this time, something closer to gratitude. Beverly and Eugene, as far as I know, are building something real. She calls every couple of weeks. I pick up most of the time. We are not what we were. Maybe we never will be, but we're something. Two women in their 60s who know each other's full truth now, which is maybe more intimate than the friendship we had before, when we were still protecting each other from our own complications. The divorce was finalized in November. Patricia Odom was right. I was fine. The settlement was fair. The house stayed mine. I kept the dogwood tree. There is a morning I keep coming back to, about 8 months after everything fell apart on a Saturday in December when Atlanta had that particular cold brightness that almost looks like snow but never quite is. I woke up at 7, made coffee, and stood in my kitchen in my robe and my reading glasses, and I looked around at my house, and something settled. Not happiness exactly, not yet. Something quieter and more durable. Something like, I'm still here, and I know who I am. At 61, I had expected to be coasting. I had expected the hard reinventions to be behind me, the career pivots, the identity shifts, the moments of standing at a crossroads with no map. I had expected 61 to be comfortable. What I got instead was an education. I started a journal that December, not for anyone else, not a blog, not social media, not anything public, just a notebook I kept on my nightstand and wrote in most mornings before the day got going. I wrote about what I was learning, about loneliness and honesty, and the difference between a life that looks fine from outside and one that actually is. About what I should have asked for earlier and why I didn't. One entry, I remember, started like this. I spent 24 years being the woman Robert needed me to be. Steady, unbothered, capable, low maintenance emotionally. I thought that was strength. I think now it was self-erasure dressed up as virtue. I read that back and sat with it for a long time. How many of us do that? How many women, especially Black women of my generation, raised to be strong, raised to handle things, raised to be the last one standing no matter what? How many of us spend decades being exactly what everyone around us needs and quietly lose track of what we need? My friend Sandra, we've been close since our 20s, came down from D.C. to spend New Year's with me. We sat by the fireplace on New Year's Eve with a bottle of decent red wine, and we talked the way women talk when they're not performing for anyone. She told me she'd been unhappy in her own marriage for 11 years. I told her I had known something was wrong in mine for at least 4. We sat with that. "Why do we do that?" she asked. "Because leaving is terrifying," I said, "and because we are very, very good at convincing ourselves that what we have is enough." "Is it enough?" she asked. "Now, looking back?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "it wasn't. But I had to see it clearly before I could say that, and it took a wedding and a set of cold eyes and an old woman in white gloves to make me see it." Sandra laughed, that big, unguarded laugh she's had since 1987. "Estelle sounds like my grandmother," she said. "She probably is," I said. "They made a certain kind of woman back then that they don't make enough of anymore." We rang in the new year quietly, just the 2 of us, and it was exactly enough. In February, I went to New Orleans alone, as planned. I need you to understand that alone is not a sad word in this sentence. I want to be clear about that. Alone meant I ate dinner at 8:30 at night at a little Creole restaurant on Frenchmen Street because I felt like it and nobody's schedule needed accommodating. Alone meant I walked for 2 hours through the Marigny on a Tuesday morning listening to a brass band rehearsing through an open window. Alone meant I sat in the back of a small jazz club on my 3rd night and let the music do whatever it wanted to do to me without worrying about whether the person beside me was enjoying it. Alone, it turned out, was extraordinary. On my 5th night, I had dinner at the bar of a nicer restaurant because every table was taken and I was hungry and I refused to go back to the hotel. The bartender was a woman about my age. Natural silver locks, arms like she'd worked hard her whole life, the kind of ease behind a bar that comes from decades of practice. Her name was Lorraine. We talked for 2 hours. She'd been divorced twice, raised 4 kids, and currently, she told me cheerfully, was absolutely not looking for anyone and having the time of her life. "What's the secret?" I asked. She set down the glass she was polishing and looked at me directly. "You have to grieve the life you thought you were going to have," she said. "Actually grieve it. Not rush past it to the new chapter everyone keeps talking about. Sit with the loss, name it, and then, only then, can you figure out what you actually want, as opposed to what you always assumed you'd want." I thought about that for the rest of the trip. What had I assumed I'd want? A long marriage? Grandchildren eventually. Robert retired beside me, the 2 of us growing old the way Harold and Estelle had done. A continuity. A completing of the story I thought I was in. That story was over, and the grief of that, the real, legitimate grief of a life you planned and prepared for and didn't get, needed to be honored. Not wallowed in, not rushed past. Honored. I spent the last 2 days in New Orleans just being sad. Sitting in a courtyard with a cafe au lait, watching the bougainvillea, letting myself feel exactly what I felt without apologizing for it, or managing it, or reframing it into a lesson. Sometimes loss is just loss. I came home on a Sunday morning. Keisha called as I landed. "How was it?" she asked. "Hard," I said. "And beautiful, and exactly what I needed." "That's usually how it goes," she said, and I could hear her smiling. Spring came back to Atlanta like it had something to prove. The dogwood in the front yard, Robert's tree, my tree now, bloomed white and extravagant in the 2nd week of March. I stood on the porch with my coffee and looked at it for a long time. I had made a decision. I was keeping the house, yes, but I was also going to change it. Not gut it, Not erase 24 years of living because a man had made bad choices, but layer over it, make it more mine, paint the kitchen a color I'd always wanted and Robert had always vetoed, take down the formal dining room furniture nobody ever used and put in a reading room. Put my watercolors on the walls, my own work, imperfect and honest, where his golf trophies used to sit. Keisha came down for a weekend and helped me. We painted the kitchen a deep terracotta on a Saturday, music loud, wine open, paint on our clothes, laughing at things that weren't even that funny because the laughter itself was the point. At one moment, she stood back and looked at the wall and said, "Mama, this is you." I looked at it. She was right. I called Estelle on a Sunday afternoon in April just to check in. She was doing well. Harold had had a small health scare in January but was recovering. They were planning a trip to see family in North Carolina in the summer. 63 years in June, she told me. Lord, I said, what's the secret? She laughed, a small silver laugh. Every morning, she said, before Harold wakes up, I sit in the kitchen alone for 30 minutes. Just me, my coffee, my Bible, my thoughts. She paused. You have to know who you are alone before you can be good for anyone else. I learned that early, and I never forgot it. I wrote that down too. Beverly and I had lunch in April, first time face-to-face since the wedding. We sat in a restaurant in Midtown Atlanta, neutral ground, and we looked at each other across the table like two people who have seen each other fully, without flattering light, and are deciding whether what they see is still worth loving. It was uncomfortable. It was also, somehow, more real than most of our lunches over the past decade had been. We talked for 3 hours. About the friendship, about what had broken, and what might be repaired, about what we each needed going forward. We did not hug when we parted, but we made plans for next month. That felt like enough. The last thing I want to tell you about is a Tuesday morning in May, about a year after the wedding. I was in my watercolor class. We were working on a still life, flowers, a glass, afternoon light from a studio window. I was completely absorbed in trying to get the translucency of the glass right, the way light moves through something transparent, the way you can see right through it and still know it's there. And it occurred to me, sitting there with my brush and my imperfect painting, 61 years old, divorced, rebuilding, still figuring it out, that I was happy. Not the happiness of having everything arranged correctly, not the happiness of a completed life, but the happiness of being genuinely present in a moment that belonged entirely to me. My instructor, a woman in her 70s with paint-stained everything, walked past, looked at my work and said, "Diane, that glass is really coming alive." I looked at it. She was right. A year and a half after the wedding, I did something I never expected to do. I said yes to a date. His name was Gerald Fontaine, 64 years old, retired high school principal, widower of 6 years. He had warm brown eyes, a slow smile, and the kind of patience you can only develop through genuine loss. We met at a gallery opening Keisha had dragged me to in Baltimore. She had planned it, I later found out, with all the subtlety of a woman who thinks her mama has been alone long enough. I almost didn't go. I stood in front of my closet for 30 minutes telling myself I was tired, that I wasn't ready, that it was too soon. Then I remembered Lorraine from the bar in New Orleans. Grieve it fully. Then figure out what you actually want. I had grieved. I had done the work. I had painted my kitchen terracotta and traveled alone and cried in New Orleans courtyards and sat across from Beverly and told her the truth and heard hers back. I had rebuilt something in myself that I hadn't even known was broken. Maybe I was allowed to want something new. Gerald and I talked for 2 hours at that gallery, standing in front of a painting neither of us particularly understood, laughing about it. He asked for my number at the end of the night, with the directness of a man who had stopped playing games somewhere around his 55th birthday. "I'd like to take you to dinner," he said. "Not to impress you, just to talk more." Just to talk more. I thought about that sentence on the drive back to Keisha's apartment. When was the last time a man had wanted to simply be in my company? When had conversation itself been the point, rather than a performance? Our first dinner was at a small Creole restaurant in Baltimore. He'd asked what kind of food I loved, and I told him New Orleans had ruined me. And we sat for 4 hours. He talked about his wife, Patricia, without flinching. About losing her to breast cancer, and the 3 years after that he described as walking through fog. About how his 2 sons had kept him upright. About slowly, unevenly, finding his way back to himself. I told him about Robert, about the wedding, about the year that followed. He listened the way good listeners do, not filling silence, not offering solutions, just staying present with the weight of what I was saying. When I finished, he said, "You sound like someone who did the hard thing instead of the easy thing." "I didn't have much choice," I said. "You always have a choice," he said gently. "Some people take what happened to you and let it make them smaller. You didn't." I looked at my hands. "I tried not to," I said. I drove home that night along the Baltimore Harbor, the water dark and reflecting the city lights, and I felt something I hadn't felt in so long I almost didn't recognize it. Hope, quiet, careful, undramatic hope. Not the fireworks kind. The slow kind. The kind that feels like a window opening in a room that's been closed too long. Gerald and I took it slow, deliberately, consciously slow, not out of fear but out of respect. For where we'd each been, for the time it takes to truly know someone rather than the time it takes to construct a pleasant impression of them. We saw each other once a month at first, him driving down to Atlanta or me going up to Baltimore, phone calls in between, real ones, not texts, actual voices, actual conversations that sometimes ran past midnight without either of us noticing. He had opinions about jazz and strong opinions about cornbread and a laugh that arrived unexpectedly and then filled the whole room. My mother met him in October. I brought him to Memphis for a weekend and held my breath. Cora Broward looked at him for approximately 45 seconds over the dinner table and then turned to me and said, "Well, he's a considerable improvement." Gerald laughed so hard he knocked over his sweet tea. I knew then. Keisha cried when I told her we were officially together. Happy tears, the kind she'd been holding since she'd engineered that gallery opening. "You deserve this, Mama," she said. "You have always deserved this." I thought about that word. Deserve. I had spent so many years not thinking in those terms, not asking what I deserved, only what I could manage, endure, maintain. The question of what I deserved had felt almost indulgent, like asking too much. I was 62 now, and I was learning, finally, that knowing your worth is not arrogance. It is the most basic form of self-respect, and that you cannot love anyone well. Not your children, not your friends, not a new man with warm eyes and a slow smile until you have established it in yourself. Beverly called on my 62nd birthday. She sang the entire song off-key and enthusiastic the way she'd done every birthday for 31 years. I laughed and sang the last line back with her the way I always had. We weren't what we were, but we were something. Something honest now, without the layers of unspoken things. Something that had been broken and reset the way a bone heals stronger at the fracture line. "I'm happy for you," she said when I told her about Gerald. "I really am, Diane." "I know," I said, and I believed her. "The last person I want to tell you about is Estelle Whitfield." Harold passed in November, quietly, at home in the house they had shared for 60 years with Estelle beside him. Beverly told me, and I sent flowers, and then I called. Estelle answered on the third ring. Her voice was smaller than I'd heard it, but still steady, still her. 63 years, she said, and I would do every one of them again. "I know you would," I said. "Are you doing all right, baby?" she asked. And even in her grief, she was asking about me. That's the kind of woman she was. "I'm doing better than all right," I said. "Because of you, partly." She made a small, dismissive sound, the sound of a woman who doesn't take credit easily. "You did the work," she said. "I just told you what I saw." "Sometimes that's everything," I said. We talked for an hour. About Harold. About grief. About the way love changes shape over time but doesn't diminish. About what it means to have truly known another person, their full complexity, their failures, and their tenderness, and to have chosen them anyway every day for decades. Before we hung up, she said, "Don't waste the good years, Diane. Whatever years you have left, don't waste them being less than you are." I looked out at the dogwood tree in my front yard, bare now in November, just branches against a gray sky, but I knew what it would do. Come spring. I had watched it for 24 years. It would bloom again. It always did. I put down the phone and sat in the quiet of my terracotta kitchen, my color, my walls with my imperfect watercolors hanging where the golf trophies used to be. And I thought about everything the last 2 years had cost me and everything they had given me. And for the first time since a Saturday night in Charlotte when the floor dropped out from under my life, I felt completely, genuinely, unreservedly whole.